Perhaps negatively.
Careers,
I think Senator Orrin Hatch probably is the new Jesse Helms, and I say that in a non-pejorative fashion. I think he will be. No, I think he'll be the. I think he'll be the. No, I think he'll be the leader of the new right. I think he's established himself in this particular battle as the leader of the new right in the Senate. I mean, Senator Helms is old and somewhat limited in his ideology.
Do you agree, David, that that the Republicans played their game, which was to destroy Anita Hill, so much better than the Democrats did?
Well,
to defend her and destroy Clarence Thomas?
I think that they undermined her credibility and raised doubts about her credibility more effectively than the Democrats did. But I think to be fair about this, you know, the whole process, you know, as Peter Kahn wrote yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, the process of advise and consent has unfortunately become a process of search and destroy. Yeah. And that's what's happening on the other side. I think the Republicans, under those circumstances, felt they had no other option but to raise questions about her credibility.
And the Democrats, of course, had been accused by Senator Danforth and others of seeking to destroy Clarence Thomas. So it was the Republicans felt it was tit for tat.
I do think that there is this question mark, and you know, when a charge comes out of the shadows, as this one did, you know, I don't think it's appropriate just to take it at face value without questioning the person and the charge. And it seems to me that the charge comes out of the shadows like this, that the person who's throwing the charge simply to throw it should not disqualify somebody in the court. The burden should not be on the person who is charged.
I don't think it was in this case. I think a perfect example. The Republicans came out, and what were the charges at the outset? She was a pawn of all these interest groups. She was being duped. She was somebody who didn't know what she was up to. She was an ideologue trying to serve. Turns out she's fought Bork for his confirmation. She passes the lie detector test, at which point you see the absolute acrobatics ideologically of our senators. Liberals who have been decrying lie detector tests for generations say, my God, she passed it. Conservatives who've been pushing for them to keep the commies out of our government are saying, oh my God, they're non-conclusive, even though the FBI guy who had been the polygraph expert administered it. And so at that point they say, no, she's not a pawn. We recognize she's not a pawn. She's not an ideologue. She's obviously delusional. I mean, now, when did Strom Thurmond become Sigmund Freud and start this psychoanalysis? I mean, so that's where it came, and that's where it ended. I think the Democrats served her badly, and I think that proved why they're not a presidential party. They don't have an instinct for the visceral fight that the Republicans have.
I don't think it was the race charge that held the Democrats' hand. I do think...
Why did George Bush yesterday afternoon cite the one poll result of African Americans on the White House lawn? He wasn't talking about women, David. He was talking about blacks.
But let's remember one thing on the race card. Blacks were supporting Clarence Thomas at 60% before these hearings started, and they continue to support him now. Playing the race card did not bring the blacks over to support Clarence Thomas.
They were already there,
before.
You're saying.
And that's right. And to say Orrin Hatch is the leader of the new right, who is the co-author of a bill against polygraph tests. With all due respect,
I'm not using new right as a pejorative. I'm saying I think he emerged in this. I mean, he is the world's most aging ingenue because he learned about ethnic stereotypes that had no longer, he'd apparently been hermetically sealed in his life.
Can I raise one last question for one second? The critical thing for the president now is to help bring the country together, to heal, and not to engage in a vindictive campaign.
Third time you've said that on different issues. Third time you've said that, and he hasn't done it yet.
Well, it's very important he do it here.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. Gentlemen, thank you.
For more reaction to today's Senate vote, we hear from two lawyers who were involved in the process and two of the witnesses who testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Phyllis Berry Myers was the director of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's Office of Congressional Affairs under Clarence Thomas. She testified this weekend for the judge. Joseph Broadus, a law professor at George Mason University, testified for him at an earlier hearing. Joel Paul is a law professor at American University. He was a corroborating witness for Anita Hill this weekend, and Emma Jordan, a friend of Anita Hill's, was one of the lawyers who volunteered to serve as her legal counsel. Starting with you, Ms. Jordan, what's your reaction to the vote? Were you at all surprised?
No, I wasn't. You know, I knew when I went into this representing Anita Hill that this whole process was as much about politics as it was about the proof of a claim of sexual harassment.
And so your reaction to the vote?
Politics prevailed. We're in Washington, D.C., and the politics of the situation prevailed.
But are you sad or happy, or do you have an emotional reaction to it?
I do. And let me tell you why I can be optimistic about this. And I am optimistic. The emotional reaction is that Anita Hill has left this town with her head held high. She's gone back to Oklahoma. I spoke to her last night. She was preparing for 2 classes. She's going on with her life. with a polygraph test, with a panel of 4 witnesses who established credibly that she told them about this charge at the time it occurred and later. She can go back to her hometown and hold her head high. And so that part of it I'm happy about. Clearly, I'm unhappy that 48 senators feel that this nominee was not either sufficiently competent or should not be believed on the charge of sexual harassment, that they voted against him.
All right,
so we've got a damaged
Sorry.
Supreme Court justice as a result of this process. That part I'm very sad about.
All right, we're going to come back to some of the things you mentioned in a minute, but I just want to get Joel Paul's reaction to the vote.
Well, I think I would have to agree with Professor Jordan that it was a political process from the beginning. I think that the system has worked. It has been a hard fight for both people, and both of them have been seriously hurt by this. I agree with her that the court has been hurt, and I hope that we've all learned something from it.
Ms. Barry Myers, what was your reaction to the vote?
I'm delighted that Clarence Thomas is going to serve on the Supreme Court. I don't think that either the court nor he have been sufficiently damaged, as they say. I think Clarence Thomas is going to be a much more, he already was an aware and a sensitive individual, but I think he is going to be even more so concerning the rights of an accused, the rights of privacy, allegations of sexual harassment. I think that he's going to be a person that, having been there, will bring that experience to the court, and I'm delighted for him and his family.
Mr. Broadus, your reaction to the vote?
I think this has been a long and difficult confirmation process, and that we have seen perhaps a truly outlandish campaign, starting with the suggestions of wife beating, of drug use by his children, of violations of the code of judicial ethics. It seemed endless. And one of the reasons that I became involved was because I sincerely believed that this process was getting out of hand, and that it would just had to be stopped. And I believe that the vote of the Senate today overall rejects a kind of involvement by some of the groups that have been willing to engage in almost any tactic to stop a nominee.
You just heard Ms. Jordan say, however, that he is a damaged Supreme Court nominee. What's your response to that, and do you see this vote today as a total vindication of Judge Thomas?
There's nothing, there's no damaged Supreme Court justice. He will have one vote, and the influence that he has on the court will be determined by his working relationship with all of the justices in a tight situation. If he goes there and performs properly and builds a relationship, then he will become a full Supreme Court justice and have whatever influence he will in the court.
What do you say to that, Mr. Paul?
I think that the court has been damaged by this process, but I think that the damage is due not to the congressional branch. I think the damage may have been done by the executive branch and the way in which the executive branch has treated the court nominations recently. It seems to me that when you nominate people for the job of a Supreme Court justice who are very young, whose track record is somewhat shorter, and I don't mean that to disparage in any way Judge Thomas's enormous achievements at a very young age, you do risk certain things, and particularly in those cases where you've chosen people on the basis of political ideology, and you've done it without consultation with congressional leadership, there's a risk that there's going to be this kind of nasty fight. I think this can be avoided in the future if we focus on the language of the Constitution that says advise and consent. That's the Senate's role, to advise. And by bringing the Senate into the process at an earlier stage to consult with the President, to try to choose a nominee who is a consensus candidate, I think we can avoid this kind of a fight in the future.
The LA Times asserted in the editorial today that there will always be an overarching cloud over Judge Thomas's head, primarily because of the events of the weekend. Ms. Barry Myers, what impact do you think all of the ventilation of the weekend will have on Judge Thomas and his ability to serve on the court?
I've been involved in the political process and the electoral process for a long time, and I know that the American public's interest is fleeting. And so I think a year from now, 6 months from now, it's going to be difficult for the people to remember, I believe, this incident. And especially, he's going to go about doing his job in a creditable fashion, and I don't believe that the American public is going to remember this for a long, long time.
Ms. Jordan, maybe you heard some of the testimony today. Some of the senators were saying, and Gergen and Shields were just having this discussion too, that it boiled down to a question of credibility. Why do you think that the senators that you yourself mentioned and the majority of Americans were unconvinced about Anita Hill's testimony, that she was probably not telling the truth, is what one of the opinion polls said?
Well, you know, I think the task that she had was very difficult. All of us recognize that this process of bringing to the fore the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace is one that has gone forward on an accelerated basis during this confirmation hearing. So I think that what happened clearly is that her initial effort to protect herself in this process by securing confidentiality and gradually being pulled into it, and then finding herself in the middle of a Supreme Court confirmation battle that was very difficult. She was able to achieve one thing. She was able to achieve an elevation of the discussion of sexual harassment to a very broad level. We have never had a discussion about sexual harassment. Now, the question of credibility is the question you asked me. And on that, I think it was very difficult for her to overcome some of the stereotypes that all of us share about women who raise these kinds of claims. One of the stereotypes is that only bimbos, women of insubstantial achievement, are going to make this kind of claim. Another part of this is that this claim is one that is so stigmatizing to the victim. So our culture has a penalty which it attaches to those women who break that silence. And she wasn't able to win that battle, I think. Ultimately, the final analysis, those senators who chose to vote to favor Judge Thomas and to confirm him in this process, I think decided that ultimately they were unable to believe her, not because she was not a believable person. Any person who looked at her testimony, looked in her eyes. If you heard Senator Byrd, his testimony today his statements today were quite passionate in this regard. No reasonable man, he said, could look in her eyes and not believe her. So the question of her believability is not before us, I think. She passed the polygraph test. It's clear that Justice Thomas did not.
Right. Let me just get Ms. Barry Myers to respond to what you've just said.
I believe that the
question of credibility.
The request for the investigation into Anita Hill's allegations wasn't about that they didn't necessarily believe the allegations. They were concerned about the process, how it was. They felt that if the Judiciary Committee, when the allegations were first brought to their attention, had thoroughly investigated them as they should have, and had behind closed doors or whatever, however it is the Judiciary Committee works, come to some conclusion about these allegations early on, which they had, but they felt that they hadn't done it real well, then this whole public debate probably would not have occurred. What happened and riled the senators were someone felt that the Senate Judiciary Committee had not properly investigated Anita Hill's allegation, and so therefore that information was given to the media, which therefore made it a public debate. And the senators who were inclined to vote for Clarence Thomas in the first place felt that they could not do so because the sense of unfairness or the thoroughness of the investigation had not occurred, and that was what they were asking for. And then the people who were inclined to vote for him in the first place, after all of this public discourse, felt that the allegations were, as the Judiciary Committee found in the first place, not significant enough to derail the man's confirmation to the Supreme Court.
Joel Paul, where do you stand on this benefit of the doubt question? I mean, do you think that's an appropriate standard for a Supreme Court justice?
No, I don't at all. As a law professor, I think that I would have to say that this is not a trial. The regular rules of procedure didn't apply, the rules of evidence didn't apply. Had this been a trial, there would have been a lot more time to gather evidence, more evidence would have been relevant, more evidence would have been presented. But that wasn't the process. It was a political process, and accordingly, I think a political standard should have applied. I have to agree with Mr. Shields that no one has a right to expect that they're going to be elevated to the Supreme Court for a lifetime position. And I think that the Senate made today a political judgment about whether or not Judge Thomas was qualified. It was their judgment to make, and now the Senate will be held politically accountable for that judgment.
Where do you stand on that benefit of the doubt, Mr. Broadus? I mean, does that give you any concern that your candidate, as it were, is being given the benefit of the doubt, or do you feel he's been totally vindicated?
Actually, I think you have to look at this in a different posture. On Saturday night, more than a week ago, when it was announced that 53 senators had pledged their support to Clarence Thomas, there was, only lacking formality, a confirmation of Judge Thomas. And what we're really saying is, once you had that decision that he was qualified, what did it take to defeat not only the normal legal presumption, but the presumption that then resided in the Senate? Normally on appeals, however you establish something, on appeals it has to be shown that that initial decision by the Senate was clearly erroneous. And the problem is that it wasn't shown that it was clearly erroneous. I think what the American people looked to was proof of persistence of character. And I think more people were concerned with the persistent character and evidence of Judge Thomas's character than they were with the particular incident.
I think there's a difficulty there. The question of his character is central to this. Judge Thomas asked to be judged initially by the content of his character. We heard in unending detail the story of the man from Pinpoint, Georgia, and the inference we were asked to draw was that a man who had those humble beginnings would, in fact, take with him from that experience empathy, sympathy, and a feeling of compassion for those less fortunate. We ended this process with the spectacle of a Supreme Court nominee playing the most vicious racial politics we've been exposed to in a long time. We had a Supreme Court nominee testify about the difference between light-skinned women and dark-skinned women in defense of himself. He offered the affirmative action defense to the charge of sexual harassment.
Ms. Jordan, we're not going to be able to get all of those points answered, but in the final couple of few seconds we have left, 6 out of 10 of the American people today said that nothing good came out of this hearing. What is your reaction to that, just very briefly?
I would agree. I think it has been very divisive, and I'd like to say especially for the black community.
All right, let me just get Mr. Broadus's reaction.
I think something good has come out of this process. I think we've really recognized the inability of this political system to deliver in the way people want to deliver. And we're going to have to work on reforming this system so we can get better results.
Briefly, Ms. Barry Myers?
I agree with that. I think that we're in the process of seeing our political process evolve. We're still using 18th century institutions to try to govern in the 21st century.
Right.
And the media, to me, is like the unelected fourth branch of our government, and it has played a very important role in this.
Good or bad?
I'm not here to judge the media. I think that we've got to, those of us who are concerned about the electoral process have got to find some way to fit the media into this governing, since it's already there.
Okay, Joel Paul, one quick word. Anything
Yes.
good or bad?
The executive, the good thing here will be that if the executive branch begins to cooperate with Congress, and we recognize this as a political process in which Congress has an important role to play, then we can begin to avoid these kinds of divisive battles in the future.
All right, Ms. Barry Myers, Mr. Broadus, Ms. Jordan, and Joel Paul, thank you all for being with us.
Thank you.
Now the views of the Senate leadership. Judy Woodruff will ask the questions. Judy?
The leaders of the Senate are Democrat George Mitchell of Maine, the majority leader, and Republican Senator Robert Dole of Kansas, the minority leader. They join us from Capitol Hill, and Senators, we thank you for being with us. Senator Mitchell, you obviously opposed Clarence Thomas's nomination. Has the Senate made a mistake?
Well, of course, the majority felt the other way, and in our system, we accept the decision of the majority. I stated my views that I did not believe he should have been confirmed on the basis of qualification, but I accept the decision of the majority. It's, of course, a commonplace event in the Senate that the majority prevails, and often I'm on the not prevailing side, so I accept that result.
Senator Dole, you obviously think this was the right outcome.
Well, I think it was the right outcome. Now, as I said, it's up to Clarence Thomas now to demonstrate we made the right decision. I think he'll do that in the weeks, months, and years ahead. But yes, I think we made the right decision.
Senator Mitchell, Senator Danforth said less than an hour ago that an attempt has been made to destroy an individual. Is that what's happened here?
Well, obviously it was very difficult for all concerned, and I expressed my concern in my remarks today about the manner in which the confirmation process has gotten so confrontational and how difficult it is for the institutions as they now exist to deal with serious charges of a personal nature on an important nomination. It's very easy to see why Clarence Thomas feels aggrieved and that this charge came up in the process late. It was a very serious one. It was aired in a very public way. I don't think, let me speak for myself and for senators, I don't think any senator wanted to destroy anybody. And my own view is that it's very difficult not to consider these charges of this nature. It's in the process we have, a public institution doing things in public inevitably creates that impression. I hope that we can, if possible, come up with some way to accommodate the conflicting concerns.
Well, I do want to ask you about that. Senator Dole, do you agree that with Senator Danforth there was an attempt made to destroy an individual, that there was a vicious process underway here?
Well, I think it was a pretty rough and tumble process. This was hardball. I think other nominations have been pretty much that way, but you never had as much public focus. I think the dramatic events over the weekend with millions and millions of people watching a hearing, they probably never watched one before in their lifetimes. And there's a lot of focus on Clarence Thomas. I said earlier, I think both Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas have been, in effect, victimized to a certain extent. Not that we intended that. That may have been the result. But I don't disagree with Senator Danforth. But I think the important thing now, he has been confirmed. We can't worry about the past. We ought to worry about the future. And it ought to be Clarence Thomas out there demonstrating that 52 senators were right.
Does he go, Senator Dole, does he go on the court as damaged goods, as someone who's been, I don't know how to put, permanently, severely hurt by this process? Does he, how much of a burden does he carry with him to the court?
Well, my view is it may make him a stronger, more sensitive justice. When cases like this come along, he's going to understand some of the pain and agony, and I think even be more sensitive. So I think certainly it hurt. It hurt Clarence Thomas, but he's had challenges before and has always done quite well and overcome any problems. He has to think positively now. He'll probably be sworn in this Friday, I understand. Maybe he can go to work next Monday and start thinking about something else, about his future.
Senator Mitchell, how do you respond to the charges that have been leveled the last couple of days that the Democrats lost on this because they weren't willing to play hardball, that they... one quote I read said that they just succumbed to the scorched earth policy, as one columnist put it, on the part of the Republicans?
Well, the Democratic members of the committee saw it as their function to attempt to determine the truth. Senator Biden, the chairman, said at the outset that the purpose of the additional hearings was to try to get at the truth on a very limited factual question. The problem is, of course, that congressional hearings are intended to serve the purpose of discussing and debating legislation and broad policy issues. They're very poorly suited to determine specific factual issues like truth or falsehood. There are no real rules that apply. It's very difficult to make any kind of assessment of that type.
But do you think the Democrats should have played tougher in this fight? It was a fight, after all.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by tougher. I thought they asked questions, they attempted to stick to the facts, they attempted to elicit responses on the subjects that were before them.
Yeah, I might just add, you remember Clarence Thomas was under scrutiny by the committee for a long time. He was on the witness stand 5 days in the regular hearing, and there were a lot of efforts to attack his credibility on issues. Some were directed at his character. He was called a pervert, or not called by members of the committee, but at least some of the testimony, anti-Semite, a whole list of things. So I think if the hardball, I think we've been played for some time. Anita Hill came in at the last minute. She only played about one inning. He played a full game.
Senator Dole, this gets back to a question I asked a moment ago, but what about Judge Thomas's charge that he was the victim of a high-tech lynching in effect, as many people have said, he played the race card in all of this?
Well, you know, I can't put myself in the shoes of Clarence Thomas. I do know that this was his statement. There wasn't any coaching, wasn't any orchestration by the White House. This is what he wanted to make. This is what he wanted to say. He was a very angry man, and he felt that his character was being assassinated.
Well, do you think that's what happened here?
Well, my own view, I don't think so. But again, I may not know. Clarence Thomas probably got a better feel for this than Bob Dole.
But, I mean, you were certainly very close to the process. You're the Republican leader of the Senate.
Right, but I didn't look at his statement. My own view was that if he feels that way, maybe he ought to say it. I might disagree with the statement. But Clarence Thomas, his nomination to win or lose, and he felt strongly about the stereotyping. My view is it probably helped him with a lot of blacks in America because he picked up from about 50%, 63, 65, 67% of black support across America.
Do you think that's what happened, Senator Mitchell?
Well, I don't know that, of course, but I do not agree with the charge. I do not believe that it was a racist proceeding or that it was a lynching or any of the other characterizations that Judge Thomas used.
But that charge, along with so many of the other charges that have been leveled in both directions, has left such an atmosphere of acrimony in the Senate and around the Senate here in Washington. How do you come out of something like this, Senator?
Well, obviously it's very difficult, but we have to do it. We have other business to attend to. The nation must move on. I agree completely with Senator Dole that Judge Thomas has now been confirmed. He'll be sworn in. He'll be a Supreme Court member for many years to come. Everyone ought to try to learn as best we can from the mistakes of this, improve as best we can in the future, but we can't spend our time looking back and refighting these battles.
What were the mistakes?
Well, I think in retrospect, you can go back and see over a sequence of events that the committee was placed in a very hard position, really caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, severely criticized for not investigating this charge thoroughly and publicly. Then when they did do so, criticized for doing that. The nature of the circumstances was such, couldn't be foreseen by anyone. They certainly weren't foreseen by Senator Dole and I as this thing unfolded. And it was dealt with in a way that doesn't please everybody, but at each step of the way represented the best judgment as what has to be done. I think now what we have to do is look forward and move away from this and deal with other issues. I think it's very important, if I could, Judy, just to say that controversy is not a new thing in the Senate. Senator Dole and I disagree almost every day, but we still have to work together. We do work together, respect each other. The same thing happens in the institution as a whole and between and among the institutions of government. And that's the attitude I think we have to take on this.
But you're almost making it sound as if, Senator Mitchell, this was sort of an inevitable thing, the way the process, the way the charges unfolded, the way the process unfolded. Do you agree, Senator?
No, I don't. I'm not saying that it was inevitable. It happened in a way that no one foresaw and could not foresee, which was not planned. And as a result, we got a very unsatisfactory process that people were injured in. What we have to do now is to look back, review it as best we can to see what can we learn from this, can we change, can we improve the manner in which we deal with these things as we still move forward on other business.
But my view is, and I think Senator Mitchell, we've already talked about, he asked me about, maybe we ought to see if the process, what can we do to improve it. But let's face it, next week maybe we'll be on a civil rights issue. Senator Danforth has been the leader on the Republican side trying to get a compromise. He'll be working with Senator Kennedy and Senator Dodd and Senator Biden, many people who were opposed to his position on Clarence Thomas. So there'll be some tensions for a while, but we have to understand that we're a mature, adult organization. We have to get our work done, and it's up to the leadership to keep things moving. I don't see any. I think it was a little overplayed. I think all the Senate was going to fall apart. We weren't even going to be able to meet tomorrow or whatever. We'll be there tomorrow. We'll be voting on a very important issue, an attempted override of an unemployment bill. So we'll see what happens. There may be a few tensions, but my view is it'll be gone in a week or two.
Just another thing, Senator Dole, Senator Mitchell said just before the vote, among other things, he said what happened to Professor Hill when she came forward with these charges really sends a message that women who claim sexual harassment are not going to be treated seriously. And he used even stronger words than those, and I don't happen to have the quote in front of me. Do you agree with that?
Well, we predicted in advance that she wasn't going to just come up and make a charge and not have her credibility questioned. We've been questioning Clarence Thomas's credibility for 105 days, and that's why she didn't want to be public. She wanted to have an affidavit and thought it would all go away. And I don't think she ever intended to be a public witness, but she was, and she has to expect when you're in that position, one person, one accuser out of all the people Clarence Thomas had known, your credibility is going to be attacked.
Senator Mitchell?
Well, I also said in the statement, of course, that Judge Thomas and his supporters would make the same argument in reverse, giving the way in which the circumstances developed. But I do think it important that women do have the feeling and the understanding that their words will be given the same weight as the words of men, that their claims will be dealt with in the same serious fashion, and it takes work and effort to do that.
And do you think they have that feeling coming out of these hearings?
And I just added, many of those who were on the other side were women. I mean, it wasn't all the men versus the women. Many of the sharpest critics of Anita Hill, Professor Hill, were people who had known her and worked with her and worked with Clarence Thomas, all women.
All right. Well, Senator Mitchell, Senator Dole, we thank you both for being with us.
Finally tonight, essayist Roger Rosenblatt, editor-at-large for Life magazine, has some closing thoughts on this controversy.
The reason people are having so much trouble identifying sexual harassment these days is that the offense may have less to do with sex than gender. Though after this past weekend's testimony, it may be hard not to concentrate on the sex. The harassment issue is still confounding. Ever since Professor Anita Hill accused Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of lewd and overbearing conduct toward her, the country has been trying to determine a dividing line between innocent fun and genuine pain. But the pain felt by a woman who suffers indignities from men in a place of work rarely is connected to the men's sexual desires. The pain is experienced because women are made to feel inferior. Inferior intellectually, emotionally, professionally, in a situation where they have every right to feel equal. They are not so much sex objects as targets of bigotry. Now, bigotry between sexes, unlike bigotry between races, is fraught with a lot of biological tension that can make it seem something other than it is. And as psychologists teach us, the sex drive can be the power drive as well. But when some guy calls a female colleague honey and does nothing else, I think it's a stretch to assume that honey is a sign of his wanting to roll in the hay. Much more likely, the term of endearment is actually a term of derision, of deliberate belittling. Not very subtly, he wants to tell the woman, okay, you've got a big job now, but this is still a man's world, honey, and I'm going to make you feel as uncomfortable in it as I possibly can. The movie Tootsie brought out this kind of sexual bigotry as well as anything. Dustin Hoffman passing as a woman and playing an actress in a soap opera chews out her director, played by Dabney Coleman, the archetype male chauvinist pig, when Coleman puts her down by calling her by a supposedly affectionate nickname.
Tootsie, take 10. Hon, my name is Dorothy. It's not Tootsie or Toots or Sweetie or Honey or Dow.
Oh, Christ. Coleman isn't interested in squeezing Tootsie's body, but in squeezing her mind. He wants to make her think she does not belong. That, I think, is the real and cruelest motive behind most sexual harassment. A motive which can be traced in benign form to all the popular new books on maleness and manhood. In the 1990s, men are finally beginning to realize that the women's movement has moved. It has happened. Some men take the news well, some grudgingly, some angrily, and some angrily who only appear to take it well. These are the ones you often find leering over the water cooler or reaching out to make a pinch. They don't want sex. They want dominance. They want the world set back to when they ruled it. Of course, we've seen this type of behavior before, but it was in the South before the 1960s, when American blacks were told they were not Americans. And it was in the early years of the century, when American Irish, Slavs, Jews, Italians, and others were told they were not American either. Irish need not apply. American Hispanics are told the same thing today, as are American Asians, and American homosexuals, and the American handicapped. With civil rights laws in place, bigots have nowhere to turn except toward the lesser forms of tyranny. The matter often lies in intention. Most male bigots intend to bring women down all right, not on the bed, in the entire society. Much has been made of the fact that the so-called gray area lies where a woman misinterprets a man's intentions. I think that misinterpretation is far more likely when it applies to sexual intentions than when it comes to bigotry. No law can prove it, but the heart knows when it is being assaulted as being something inferior, not worthy, not human. The man who does anything, anything at all to make a woman feel not human, is no different from the coward Klansman hiding his hatred under a sheet. He's not making love. He's making war. I'm Roger Rosenblatt.
Again, the story of this Tuesday was the Senate vote to confirm Clarence Thomas as an Associate Justice to the U.S. Supreme Court. The final vote was 52 to 48. The margin of victory came from conservative and moderate Democrats who said they were not persuaded to change their support for Thomas by the Anita Hill sexual harassment charges. Good night, Charlene.
Good night, Jim. That's the NewsHour tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more reaction to the confirmation of Judge Clarence Thomas as the next United States Supreme Court Justice. I'm Charlene Hunter-Gall. Thank you and good night.
Funding for the NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. Every day we enjoy people being cold to us, cutting us up, getting fresh with us, tearing into us, and calling us chicken. In fact, the more people do it, the happier we are. PepsiCo. And by AT.